I never expected that day to change my life. Not like this. The earthquake hit with a force so powerful, it felt like the earth itself was angry. The world around me cracked open, pieces of buildings falling. I grabbed my boyfriend, pulling him towards safety. But then, the unthinkable happened. A pillar collapsed, pinning my legs beneath it. I looked at him, just for a moment, and he was safe. That was all that mattered. But as the world faded, one thought lingered in my mind. He would never leave me, right? Pain. Unbearable pain. And then, a silence that felt like death itself. I woke up to a new reality. The smell of sterile hospital air, the sound of machines beeping in rhythm. But something was wrong. My legs. I couldn't feel them. Panic set in as I tried to move, but there was nothing, just emptiness. As the nurse came into the room, her face a mix of pity and professionalism, I asked about him. "Where's my boyfriend?" I needed to see him, needed him to be there. But when she told me, the truth hit harder than any physical pain. Days passed, and he never came. Not once. No calls, no visits, not even a text. I waited, hoping he'd come rushing in with guilt in his eyes, apologizing for not being there when I needed him most. But nothing. My world had become a prison of silence and loneliness. The only company I had was my own thoughts, the growing realization that the man I'd sacrificed everything for, he wasn't coming back. He had left me behind. And the worst part, I hadn't even heard his voice since the moment we were pulled apart. I felt so small. Then, one day, I saw him. He was standing at the door of my room, dressed in a sharp suit, looking better than I had ever seen him. But there was something different, something in the way he held himself. He wasn't the same. And in his arms, there she was, a woman, beautiful, graceful, and completely unaware of the broken girl sitting on the hospital bed. My heart dropped to my stomach. I couldn't breathe. Why? I whispered, barely able to speak, hoping the answer wouldn't crush me completely. He looked at me, his eyes cold, like he hadn't known me for years. Then, as though I was nothing more than a nuisance, he spoke the words that would shatter everything. "I don't want a cripple," he said. "I need a woman who can walk beside me." Those words, they echoed in my ears, and I felt the ground beneath me crumble. All the years of love, all the moments I had given him, meant nothing. He wasn't my hero. He was just another man who didn't care about me at all. I was broken. My body, my heart, but most of all, my trust. And yet, there was a part of me that didn't want to accept it. Maybe I could still fix things. Maybe I could still prove I was worth it. But I didn't. I couldn't. The betrayal was too much. In my weakest moment, I thought I had nothing left to live for. That was when something changed. A feeling, something strange, almost like a spark inside me. In that moment, I knew I wasn't done. I wasn't going to give up, not like this. Then it happened. I was reborn. It wasn't a dream, it was real. I woke up again, back to the day before the earthquake, before everything went wrong. I could feel the earth trembling beneath me, but this time, I wasn't afraid. I knew what was coming. I knew the pain, the devastation. But this time, I wouldn't let it consume me. This time, I would change everything. I wouldn't save him. I wouldn't sacrifice myself. I would save me. And I would make sure he never had the chance to destroy me again. I watched him from afar, a ghost of my past life. He was still the same, still charming, still oblivious to the truth about who I was. But I was no longer the person I had been. I had learned. I had seen the worst of him, and now I understood. This time, I kept my distance. I stayed away, letting him reach out, only to pull back, again and again. It confused him. He didn't know what had changed. He didn't know that I wasn't the girl who would cling to him anymore. That girl was dead. The world around me began to change, too. People I once considered friends, they watched me rise with a mix of disbelief and envy. I didn't care. I didn't need their approval. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my strength. I started using the knowledge of the future to my advantage, investing wisely, building my power. The earthquake still happened, the same devastating force that had stolen everything from me, but this time I was ready. I was untouchable. And as I watched him struggle, I realized he had become the one who needed me now. His world was falling apart. Everything he had built was crumbling. The wealth, the status, it meant nothing. He had made his choices, and now he was paying the price. I had known this would happen. I had seen it. And I stood there, watching him beg, his pride shattered. "Please," he said, desperation in his voice. "I made a mistake." But it was too late. I had already made my choice. The person I once was, she was gone. And in her place was someone stronger. Someone who would never let him control her again. Not ever. That was the moment I knew. He had nothing left. His wealth, his status, his so-called new love, all of it was gone. I had left him behind, and I would never look back. I walked away, the weight of everything I had suffered finally lifting off my shoulders. The person I had been, the weak, hopeless girl, was no more. She was gone, and in her place stood someone who had learned to live for herself. The future was mine, and no one, especially not him, would ever take that from me again. I stood there, staring at him, watching the life he had built crumble. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had once looked at me with such arrogance, believing I would always be there, waiting. But not anymore. He didn't know it yet, but I had already moved on, far beyond the woman he once knew. As he tried to beg for mercy, for a second chance, I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. His downfall was my redemption. The laughter inside me echoed, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I just looked at him, my face a perfect mask of indifference. "You don't deserve me," I said, my voice calm but sharp. The words hit him like a slap, and I saw it in his eyes. The realization that he had wasted everything. The woman who had once been at his side was now a stranger to him. And I wasn't going back. I had found my strength, and he wasn't part of it. He tried again, of course. He wasn't used to rejection. He had always been the one in control, the one who called the shots. But the truth was, he had never controlled me. He had only believed he did. This time, when he reached out, I turned away, and that action alone was enough to make him crumble. He had no power over me anymore, and I could see that truth burning in his eyes. It was so clear now. He was no longer the man I had once loved. He was just a memory, a ghost. I had learned the hard way that people like him, selfish, manipulative, could never be trusted. I had given him my heart, my soul, and he had thrown it all away. But now I was different. The girl who had once pleaded for his attention, who had begged for his love, she was gone. She had been replaced with someone stronger. Someone who had learned the value of her own worth. And with that strength came the power to walk away, to never look back. As I continued to rise, the people around me began to notice. They saw the woman I had become, a force to be reckoned with. I wasn't the broken girl they had once pitied. I wasn't someone who would be overlooked or discarded. I was the one in control now. And as I looked at him, begging once more, I realized he was the one who had lost everything. His pride, his wealth, his influence, all of it was gone. And I was free. The contrast between us was staggering. He had everything he had once wanted, and yet he was miserable. I had nothing, except for the strength to build everything anew. And I did. Piece by piece, I built my empire, my life. I used everything I had learned from my past, every painful lesson, to craft the future I deserved. I had become the woman who didn't need anyone, especially not him. And that realization was freeing. As the months passed, I watched from a distance as he continued to spiral. His desperation was palpable, and yet he couldn't understand why everything had gone wrong. He still didn't realize that it wasn't about money or status. It had never been about that. It had always been about respect, and he had lost mine the moment he turned his back on me. His attempts to reach me were nothing more than whispers in the wind. I had already moved on, and he was stuck in the past. One day, he showed up at my doorstep. He had nowhere left to turn, no one left to rely on. His once charismatic smile was now gone, replaced by a look of fear. "Please," he begged, his voice trembling. "I was wrong. I need you. I made a mistake." I looked at him, and for a moment, I thought about how much he had hurt me. I thought about all the things I had given up for him. But I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence was my answer. He left that day, but I could tell it wasn't the last time I would hear from him. He would keep trying, hoping, praying for my forgiveness. But I knew better. I had forgiven him long ago, not because I had to, but because I had learned to forgive myself. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need his love. What I needed was my freedom. And with that freedom came a sense of peace I had never known before. As I continued to build my life, I saw how small he had become. Once he had been the center of my universe, but now he was just a footnote. He wasn't the man I had once thought he was. He was just a lesson, a painful but necessary lesson that had taught me the value of self-worth. And as I walked away from that chapter of my life, I realized that I was never really broken. I had just been waiting for the right moment to rise. And now, that moment had come. I had done it. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever before. Each step I took was a declaration that I would never again be controlled by someone else's love or approval. The pain I had felt in the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had learned how to turn it into power. I had learned how to rise above it. And now, as I stood tall, I knew nothing could stop me. The truth was, my life had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My past self, the one who had begged for love, who had given everything for someone who would never appreciate it, she was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned to fight, who had learned to walk away, not out of weakness, but out of strength. The woman I had become was someone no one could break. Not him, not anyone. It wasn't just the business I built, the power I gained, or the wealth I accumulated. It was the realization that I was finally free. I was free from the chains of insecurity, free from the fear of being alone. For so long, I had believed that my value was tied to someone else's love. But now, I understood that my worth came from within. And with that understanding came a freedom I had never experienced before. Looking back, I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. The man who had once seemed like my world, who had made me feel small and insignificant, was now a distant memory. His words, his betrayal, they didn't hurt anymore. They didn't have the power to control me. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And not just a survivor, but a victor. I had turned my pain into purpose, and that was the greatest triumph of all. The phone calls, the desperate messages, they kept coming. He still thought he could win me back. But the truth was, he wasn't the man I had once fallen for. The man I had loved had been replaced by someone unrecognizable, someone who had shown his true colors. And I wasn't going back. Not to him, not to that life. I had tasted the sweetness of independence, and I wasn't about to give it up for someone who had never truly cared for me. One night, as I sat in my new home, looking out at the city below, I realized how far I had come. I had turned my back on everything I once knew, and yet I was stronger than ever. The life I had built was mine. I had done it all by myself. No one had handed me anything. No one had made it easy, but I had made it happen. And that was all that mattered. I used to be afraid of being alone, of not having someone to share my life with. But now, I realized that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was already whole. The person I had become was enough. And when I looked at my future, I saw a life filled with endless possibilities, possibilities I had never even imagined when I was clinging to him. The future was mine to create. In that moment of realization, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The pain of the past, the anger, the betrayal, they no longer had a hold on me. I had let go, and in letting go, I had freed myself. I was no longer the person I had been when I was with him. I had grown. I had evolved, and now I was in control of my own story. The next time he came to me, begging for another chance, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I simply felt nothing. It was as though I was looking at a stranger, a man who no longer had any power over me. I smiled, knowing that I had won. He had lost, and I was the one who had gained everything. I walked away, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I had no desire to revisit the past, to relive the pain. I was too busy embracing the future that was now mine. And as I moved forward, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had come through it all, and now I was ready for whatever came next. As I continued to move forward, I began to see how much power I truly had. The world was at my feet, and I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my abilities, and to never settle for less than I deserved. I wasn't the girl who had once cried for attention, for validation. I was the woman who now demanded respect. And anyone who didn't give it to me wasn't worth my time. He had tried to reach me countless times, each message more desperate than the last, but I never responded. I didn't need closure from him. I had already closed that chapter of my life, and it was far behind me. He didn't deserve my attention. He didn't deserve my time. I had more important things to focus on, things that would help me grow, things that would push me to become the best version of myself. And those things didn't involve him. It felt liberating, walking away from all the toxicity that had once been my life. I realized how much of my energy had been wasted on someone who hadn't truly cared about me, someone who had only seen me as a means to an end. But now, I was free from that. I was no longer chained to the past. I was free to live my life on my terms. And nothing could take that away from me. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I continued to grow. I built new relationships, stronger relationships, relationships with people who saw me for who I truly was, people who valued me, respected me, and most importantly, loved me for the right reasons. It was a stark contrast to what I had once known, but it was the life I had earned, a life that was full of love, strength, and independence. I looked back at him occasionally, not out of longing, but out of curiosity. He was still stuck, still trapped in the same patterns, still pretending that he was the man who could have it all. But deep down, I knew the truth. He wasn't happy. He had lost the one thing that had mattered most, me. And now, he was left to deal with the consequences of his own actions. I knew I had made the right choice. The person I had been, the one who had clung to him for so long, was no longer part of me. I had changed. I had become someone new. Someone who was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. And as I continued on my journey, I realized that I was no longer afraid of being alone. Because in the end, I wasn't really alone. I had myself, and that was all I needed. It felt almost surreal, how far I had come. A year ago, I had been that broken girl, begging for his love. And now, I was the woman who had built a life for herself. A life that was mine. No one could take that away from me. Not him, not anyone. I had learned the greatest lesson of all, that true happiness comes from within. And once I realized that, everything else fell into place. There was a power in letting go, in walking away from something that had held me back for so long. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his validation. I had found peace within myself. And that was worth more than anything he could ever offer me. It was a strength that came from within, a strength that was unshakable. And that strength would carry me forward, no matter what came next. The world was mine now. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my future. I was no longer defined by the choices of others. I had taken control of my own destiny. And as I stood on the edge of this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had done it. I had overcome the pain, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. And now, I was stronger than ever. As I looked ahead, I saw endless possibilities. I knew there would be challenges. Of course, life was never without its obstacles. But I was no longer afraid. I had faced the worst, and I had survived. I had become someone who could handle anything that came her way. I was unstoppable, and nothing would ever make me doubt my worth again. Every step I took from that point on was a reminder that I had control over my own life. No one could dictate my path anymore. Not him, not anyone. I was the one who made the decisions, who chose which direction I would go in. And each decision I made was a declaration of my independence. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I was living life on my own terms, and nothing could change that. The journey wasn't easy, of course. There were times when I questioned my strength, when I wondered if I was really doing the right thing. But those moments of doubt were fleeting. They didn't last long, because deep down, I knew I was on the right path. I had made it this far. I had fought for everything I had, and there was no going back now. Sometimes I would think about the old me, the one who had loved him so blindly, the one who had sacrificed everything for a man who never deserved it. And I would feel a pang of regret, but it was always fleeting, because I realized that I had learned from it. I had grown from it, and the lessons I had learned were invaluable. I would never make the same mistakes again. I had learned to trust myself. I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet. And most importantly, I had learned that I was enough just as I was. I didn't need anyone's approval, anyone's love to validate my worth. I was worthy because I existed, and no one could take that from me. As time passed, I began to look at life differently. I saw it as a series of opportunities, a series of challenges that I could overcome. I wasn't afraid of what the future held anymore. I knew that I had the strength to handle whatever came my way. And if the past had taught me anything, it was that I was capable of so much more than I had ever imagined. I had spent too much of my life waiting for someone to love me, waiting for someone to see my worth. But now, I realized that I didn't need to wait anymore. I was already worthy. I had always been worthy. And if someone couldn't see that, it was their loss, not mine. The man who had once held my heart had no place in my life anymore. He was a ghost of the past, a reminder of what I had left behind. And as much as he tried to make amends, I knew that nothing he said could change the fact that I had moved on. I had outgrown him, and there was no going back to who I had been when I was with him. There was a power in choosing yourself, in putting yourself first, no matter how difficult it was. Because at the end of the day, you are the only one who can make your own happiness. And once I realized that, everything else fell into place. I was the one who controlled my destiny. And that was a power no one could take from me. Every time I thought about how far I had come, a wave of pride washed over me. I had done it. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. And while it hadn't been easy, it had been worth every sacrifice, every tear. Because I was no longer the person I used to be. I was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less. I had found peace, but more importantly, I had found freedom. Freedom from the past, freedom from the chains that had once held me down. And now, I was living the life I had always dreamed of, one that was filled with strength, independence, and the knowledge that I was enough. I had everything I needed within me, and nothing could take that away. It was strange how the world seemed different now. The things that once mattered didn't hold the same weight. All the materialistic desires, the people who tried to control me, they didn't matter anymore. I had learned the only thing that truly mattered was the life I was building for myself. It wasn't about the approval of others or fitting into some mold. It was about living authentically in a way that honored who I truly was. In the quiet moments, I would reflect on the journey that had brought me here. There were times I thought I wouldn't make it, times when it felt like the pain would consume me. But it hadn't. I had survived. And not only that, I had thrived. I had become someone who could stand tall, who could face any challenge head-on without hesitation. I had become the hero of my own story. And then there were the moments when I couldn't help but smile, when I realized just how much power I held in my own hands. I was no longer that lost girl, desperately trying to find a place to belong. I had found my place, right here, right now, in the life I had created for myself. I had given myself the love and respect I had once sought from others, and that was the greatest gift I could ever give. There was no looking back, no second-guessing my decisions, no wondering if I had made the right choice. I had done what was best for me, and it had made all the difference. I was stronger, wiser, and more capable than I had ever been. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. I didn't need him anymore. I didn't need anyone who had ever doubted me, who had ever treated me as less than. I had found my worth, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. I was finally free. Free to live my life on my own terms, to make my own choices, and to create the future I had always dreamed of. As the days went by, I became more and more confident in my decisions. It was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I no longer felt the need to explain myself, to justify my actions to anyone. I had learned that the only opinion that mattered was my own, and as long as I was happy with the choices I made, nothing else could bring me down. Looking back, I realized that everything had led me to this point. Every heartache, every betrayal, every moment of weakness had shaped me into the person I was today. It wasn't always easy, but it had been worth it. I had learned to stand tall, to fight for myself, and to never settle for less than I deserved. And I wasn't alone. There were people in my life who truly cared about me, who supported me unconditionally. They were the ones who saw me for who I truly was, not for the broken girl I had once been. They were the ones who helped me pick up the pieces when I couldn't do it on my own. And I was forever grateful for them. I couldn't help but wonder how he was doing. The man who had once been the center of my world. But I quickly pushed the thought aside. His life was no longer my concern. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. I had moved on, and I was exactly where I needed to be, on my own path, living the life I had earned. The power was in my hands now. I had taken control of my own destiny, and nothing was going to stop me. I had learned the most important lesson of all, that I was enough, that I didn't need anyone to complete me, to validate me, to give me purpose. I was whole, just as I was, and I would never forget that again. The future felt bright now. It felt like a blank canvas, ready for me to paint my own masterpiece. I no longer felt like I was following someone else's script. This was my story, and I was the author. The world was mine to conquer, and I was no longer afraid. I had faced the darkest moments of my life and come out stronger. Now, I could handle anything. There were still moments of doubt, of course. Moments when the old fears crept back in, whispering that I wasn't enough, that I couldn't do it alone. But each time, I shut those thoughts down. I had built my strength through my struggles, and those moments of weakness were nothing more than reminders of how far I had come. I had learned to trust my instincts, the same instincts that had once led me to believe in a man who didn't deserve my love. Those instincts were now guiding me toward a brighter future. I knew what I was capable of. I had seen it in action, and I wasn't afraid of what the future held anymore. I had come to understand that life wasn't about avoiding pain or hardship. It was about how you dealt with it, how you picked yourself up when you fell, how you learned from your mistakes, and how you turned every setback into a stepping stone. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't need to be. I just needed to keep moving forward. Sometimes I would hear his name in passing. I'd see his face on social media, or hear someone mention him in conversation. But it didn't affect me the way it used to. I didn't feel that familiar ache in my chest anymore. No, now I just felt indifferent. He was a part of my past. A chapter one had closed, and there was no need to reopen it. The more I focused on myself, the more I realized how much I had to offer. I wasn't just a survivor of my circumstances. I was someone who had grown, who had developed strength and resilience. I had so much potential, and now I was ready to tap into it. There was no limit to what I could achieve. I was just getting started. I had learned that real freedom wasn't about escaping from something. It was about choosing who you wanted to be, regardless of what anyone else thought or said. It was about being unapologetically yourself, standing firm in your beliefs, and not letting anyone push you around. I had reclaimed my freedom, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. The more I reflected on everything that had happened, the more I realized how much I had grown. The girl I once was would never recognize the woman I had become. I had outgrown her, just as I had outgrown everything that had tried to hold me back. I was stronger now, more self-assured, and I was finally at peace with myself. There were times when I would see people who were still stuck in the same toxic patterns I had once been trapped in. They were still chasing validation from others, still letting the opinions of others define them. It was heartbreaking to see, but it also made me grateful for the journey I had taken. I knew I had made the right choice in choosing myself, in choosing to break free from the chains that had once held me down. It was clear to me now that the most important relationship I had was the one I had with myself. If I couldn't love and respect myself, no one else would. And once I started doing that, everything changed. I began to see the world differently. I began to see myself differently. And that made all the difference. I had learned to embrace the woman I had become. The scars, both visible and invisible, no longer defined me. They were a part of my story, yes, but they weren't the whole story. They didn't control me. They weren't the final chapter. I was the one who got to decide how my story would end. and it wasn't going to end with bitterness or regret. I knew there would be challenges ahead. There always were, but I was no longer afraid of them. I had already faced the hardest challenge of all, letting go of the past and embracing my future. If I could survive that, I could survive anything, and I was ready for whatever life had in store. The best part, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't living my life to prove a point or to gain approval. I was living for me, and that was enough. That was all I needed. The peace I had found came from within, from knowing that I was in control of my own happiness. I could look back now and see everything clearly. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the pain, it had all served a purpose. It had shaped me, molded me into the person I was today. And though it hadn't been easy, I wouldn't change a thing. Because everything I had gone through had brought me here, to this moment where I was finally free. There was no going back to the way things were. And I didn't want to. The past had taught me valuable lessons, but it had no place in my future. I was moving forward, with or without anyone. I had learned that the only person I could truly count on was myself, and that was enough. The world felt different now. Lighter, more vibrant. I was no longer weighed down by fear or doubt. I had discovered a strength within me that I never knew existed, and I was using it to build a life I was proud of. A life that was mine. One that was free of the shadows of the past. I was done being anyone's second choice. Done waiting for someone to love me. Because I had learned that the most important love was the love I gave myself. And once I gave myself that, everything else fell into place. I was no longer looking for validation from others. I was validating myself. The future was mine, to create. I had the power to shape it however I wanted. And I wasn't going to waste it. No more hesitation, no more doubt. I knew who I was, and I knew what I was capable of. The best part, I hadn't even begun to scratch the surface of what I could achieve. There was a peace in knowing that I was the one who held the pen to my own story, that I had the power to decide how it would unfold, and I knew that the chapters ahead would be filled with strength, success, and the kind of happiness I had never thought possible before. And with that, I walked away, not just from him, not just from the past, but from everything that no longer served me. I walked away with my head held high, ready for the future, ready for the life I had earned. Because now I knew my worth, and nothing could take that away.